Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger. Welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Janae Daniels, and I'm going to let her tell you who she is and what she does, which I think is fantastic.
Well, thank you. I am a mom. I'm a wife first and foremost, and a mom of six. And I am a former middle school teacher. And in 2020, I stopped actually teaching 20 years ago. But in 2020, I pulled my remaining four of my six kids to homeschool. My oldest two had graduated from public high school, and my next two are about to go into high school. And then I had two youngers at home. And so I'm a homeschool mom and I started a podcast a few years ago. I guess it's been 3 years, to help other families that were leaving the public school system, especially with older kids, to successfully homeschool, which led me on a wild goose chase of independent research, learning about the history of the education system in the United States, which led me to vintage curriculum, to how were kids taught, to what does, having been a middle school teacher, I did, I'm licensed secondary education, and what, are there better ways to do high school? And so it's kind of led me on a wild goose chase. So that's who I am. I am a mom on a mission to help families reclaim the hearts and minds of their kids. That's who I am.
That's fantastic. And I understand that very well because we homeschooled our children. And we started that in, I think, 1991.
Wow.
We were
Wow.
we were living in West Virginia at the time,
Mhm.
and my oldest child, Troop, was reading at 5,
Wow.
and in his first grade class, he had kids that didn't know shapes and colors.
Wow.
So the disparity between him, who's reading, and the teacher didn't want to um, separate him and let him go back, basically do his own thing. So he had to
Mhm.
sit at the table while they all did the same
Mhm.
lessons. And he came to us and said, "Can I learn at home?" And so we went to the principal, said, "This is the situation we're in. What do you think?" And he says, "I think it's great."
Mhm.
And that's where it's all started.
Wow.
And if we had been, and just so that give them a little more context, if we had been living in North Carolina, where we now live,
Mhm.
or where we moved in 1995, we would have been could have been prosecuted for homeschooling.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, it
Wow.
was illegal at that point in time in the early 90s. And then it became
Oh.
then they changed the laws so that you could homeschool, but you had um, to do a certain testing series at the end of the
Mhm.
year to demonstrate that the child has learned something.
It says, well, and so you're like an original homeschooler, an early adopter, which is thank you. Thank you for being an early adopter because I think somebody like me, who who actually had no issues with the education system. I mean, I thought every child should go through it, and I thought homeschoolers were actually weird, because the only homeschoolers that I knew in high school, their families became polygamous and joined some fundamentalist group in, I can't remember, Arizona or somewhere. And I'm like, oh, they're so weird. Anyway, so,
Well,
um,
that was exactly what we found. So our kids were involved in 3 different homeschooling collectives.
mhm,
One was a Catholic group where we went to that because our kids were going to learn Latin.
oh, mhm,
And then we were in a conservative Christian oriented homeschool. And that was where most of those classes were taught
mhm,
mostly by mothers. And then there was another homeschool group of what I would call hippies, of alternative lifestyle people. And those 3 were quite all very different.
yeah.
And I think it was very beneficial And I'll just say this one more thing to kind of put some more context on it. So when I was a public figure is not the right word, but I was a public figure because I was doing stuff in public. I was a minister, but I was doing consulting. I was a
Yeah.
leadership guy. And when people found out that we were homeschooling, they said, "Well, what about the socialization of your children?" And my answer was, when they start grading or testing for socialization, then we can have that conversation. But
Yeah.
what we're not doing that, and your concern is a good one, but it's not actually it's not to your benefit at this point. At
So,
that,
so, so I think you bring up an interesting thing about socialization because you'd think by now that concern would be put to rest, but it's not, you know. But what I found is um I found after pulling my kids, I found that true socialization begins in the home and then it extends to society. And one of the comments that I hear from people regularly, you know, whether that's at church or through sports or wherever, is like, how do you get your kids to get along so well with each other? And um and I say, well, I pulled them to homeschool. And they said, "Oh, mine would just fight." And I said, "Well, they did at the beginning, and then they learned to get along together, and then they learned to really enjoy being together. And not that they don't spend time with other kids, because they absolutely do. I feel like it actually expanded their circle of friends, um, where they weren't just with the public school kids, but they also were with their orchestra friends and their enrichment co-op friends, and you know, their concurrent enrollment friends. And um, but the way it shifted the relationship that they had between my husband and I, and then their relationship with each other, it only shifted for the better. But it took time because they fought. Initially, they fought, but
where did the idea that we should segregate by age come from?
that's
You
from the Prussian. Yes, yes, I do. It's from the Prussian model. So. Um, Historically, and lots of people hear that like, oh, we adopted the Prussian factory system model, but most people don't know where that comes from. So in the early 1800s, Prussia was defeated grossly in the Napoleonic Wars.
Mhm.
And they looked at it and said, well, if the soldiers had been more obedient, then we wouldn't have lost, because they followed the dictates of their conscience versus following their commanders.
Ah,
So they established the model in hopes to train soldiers that would be obedient and compliant and patriotic to their cause. The elite had a different schooling model in Prussia than the lower class. Um, and they did feel like everybody should learn to read, which I think was the draw for Horace Mann when he went over and he saw, well, look how literate they all are, and they're also compliant. So one of the tenets of the Prussian model is you divide by age, not by ability. That helps with compliance. And you have a rigid bell system where they learn to start and stop when they are told. That was part of the compliance. Um, and that segregation from the family, that was part of the compliance. And so that's where we get the segregation by age, which is, as far as and I've learned this since starting to homeschool, detrimental to healthy attachment to parents and adults. And so I've read a lot of the work of Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who's one of the world's foremost attachment psychologists, and that's what he talks about. You know, this idea of putting kids together at the same age where they become attached to each other as opposed to attached to their parent figure and grow into adulthood. We've maintained this teenage culture, and it really started taking root once we developed high school and continued that same age grade through high school, and we start seeing that really in the 1940s.
does
So,
that
but it's started in the Prussian model in roughly 1806, and
does
we
that
adopted it in
explain
1852.
does that explain to a certain extent why? um, social media is such a powerful thing to adolescents?
I think so. I mean, so okay. So this gets really fascinating, and I particularly, so I'm secondary, I originally became secondary education certified, even though now I'm legally K through 12 certified in the state of Colorado. I don't teach, well, I say I don't teach anymore. I volunteer a lot and I still work heavily with various programs and things like that within public schools and within the homeschooling community. Um, but if we look at this, if we look at adolescence, this idea of teenagers didn't exist until the 20th century. And this is something that I've spent the last few months really diving into, and it's changed my perspective of how high school, what that should look like, what secondary education should look like. Um, so prior to the 20th century, when a child hit roughly 12 to 14 years old, parents would of the parents would start to look for internships or apprenticeships for their children, particularly the boys, although the girls sometimes too, because there were feminine things that girls could do, and they had to often help the family, and there was family economies and things like that. Um, they were expected to be adults between 12 and 14. Like, you are now an adult. They would dress like their parents. Um, the more elite would send their children to university. So like I think it was John Adams started university like at 14 or 16 back
Mhm.
in the 18th century. Um, and that expectation that you were moving into adulthood was very pronounced. Well, we don't even see, like, very few children went to a secondary school or high school until like 1890s. Only 6% of kids are in any form of high school. Then that's when we get the Committee of 10, which was asked by the one of the teachers unions that was around back then, which is national now the National Education Association. And they said we need to standardize everything and standardize it for high school so kids can learn more and be more educated. I question the motive behind it. But so going into the 20th century, still most students did not go to high school. My grandfather did not go to high school. None of my grandparents went to high school. Um, my husband's grandmother is 103. She still has her wits about her. I talk to her often about her growing up. She, I asked her about high school, and she goes, "No, I finished." She went to a one-room schoolhouse. Um, she finished eighth grade, and then she went to the high school, and she said, "Well, I graduated from there, but I finished when I was 16, and then I started working as a riveter, as a Rosie the Riveter." And so what's fascinating is, so we don't see an advent of teenage culture where they identify different from adults until the 1940s and 50s,
Yeah.
which perfectly coincides with when the majority of children were attending high school. And for some reason, that prolonged childhood created this thing called adolescent culture and adolescents and teenagers. And the word adolescent didn't even exist until the early 1900s. Like, that word did not exist. It was, you're a child, now you're an adult. And so what we see happen is by the 1940s and the 1950s, we have movies like Rebel Without a Cause, and teenagers have their own culture. And what's happening is, instead of, and this is where what Dr. Neufeld talks about, instead of children attaching appropriately to their parents, meaning where do they go for emotional nourishment, they start attaching to their peers who are at the same emotional level as them and who cannot give healthy advice, who cannot give the emotional nourishment needed for them to properly grow. And so we see a shift in attachment happen where these teenagers are now attaching to their peers, and social media exasperates that. We now are going into and Dr. Neufeld said we see it about 80 years. We've been into this new thing called peer attachment. And we see that with 50 plus communities with adults who would rather be with their peers than their grandchildren. Um, and it's just perpetuated itself. Um, and it's prolonged childhood into, kids and young adults kind of floundering, not knowing what to do next. And instead of there being, this idea of, okay, we look to our parents help us move into adulthood, and now I can become a healthy adult. What shocked me too was that when a child, we always assume we're like, oh, when a teenager becomes a teenager, they rebel against their parents, and and that's normal. And Dr. Neufeld argues that no, that's actually historically it's not normal. They they would want seek independence from their parents the older that they got, but they wouldn't seek to rebel against their parents. They wouldn't seek they weren't ashamed of their parents. And that's a shift that I saw with my own kids when we started homeschooling. Suddenly my children, where I saw them wanting to be more with their peers, that shifted back. Not that they didn't want to spend any time with their peers, but what I thought became more important than what any peers thought. And that becomes really important as in development of a child, because they don't seek acceptance when you have a parent oriented child. They don't seek the acceptance from their peers. They look to their parents for self-worth. They look to their parents for validation, versus these peer oriented kids who seek validation from their peers and perpetually just become a mess. We also see suicide rates increase. Like, we can see the line going up. So okay, yeah, you got me on a
Well,
topic that I am very
well,
passionate about.
so let me add more of my story. So whether I was aware of all that research or not is immaterial. I was aware that I was being asked as a father, when my oldest was 10, 11, 12 years old, my
Mhm.
youngest was probably 5, that I was being asked to answer all their questions. I was supposed to be the authority, and I was supposed to have the answers to the questions they have. And I realized I just had this intuitive sense that if I played that game out, they would never learn how to think for themselves.
Mhm.
So I stopped answering their questions, and instead they would say, "Well, they were talking about something that would have happened at one of the school things or something like that." And I said, "So, Dad, why did she say that to me?" I said, "I don't know. What do you think?"
Mhm.
"I don't know." I kept saying, "I don't know. What do you think?" And I would say to them, don't try to make a too quick assessment of that. Don't think too quickly about why something is happening, because you don't really know why things happen.
Mhm.
So just watch and try to understand, and you will figure it out. And that's exactly what happened. And 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 when my oldest was 15, my youngest, and I had 2 sons and a daughter, and my oldest was born in 85. The next son was born in 89. And when they were old enough for Boy Scouts, they went to Boy Scouts. And at some point, their scoutmaster resigned and left town, and that's a whole nother story. But I ended up taking over the role of the scoutmaster, having never done any of that. I was in Scouts for 1 year when I was a kid, so I didn't really understand. And we went from 12 boys and 3 adults, me and two 20-year-olds, to having 48 boys and over 20 adult leaders within 2 years.
Wow. That's awesome.
Well, it was also very difficult
I
because
bet.
the spectrum, this is where the spectrum of the children that were there, you could see that spectrum in how the parents treated their children. And there were a lot of homeschoolers in our troop, but they were not all homeschoolers. And many were public schools.
Mhm.
Some were private school kids. and watching those differences was very interesting. And what I did was I said, I'm only going to do what I know what to do. I'm not going to make any decisions. I'm going to let the group make the decisions, and I'm going to have people take responsibility, the adult leaders take responsibility of a particular thing that they have some passion for.
Mhm.
And so I had, eventually we had about 35 boys and I had 19 adult leaders, and we turned out to be a very good troop because what was happening was the adults were learning how to be leaders and the boys were learning how to be leaders. And I was just standing off as the head and saying, okay, this is who we are. This is what we believe. Here are our five principles. How are you doing? And instead of being directive, I was supportive and allowing that leadership to emerge from that. And I saw that as this is what needs to happen with children is that
Mhm.
they need a way to take initiative about things that are important to them where they have some responsibility for the outcome.
Yes. Well, and I think that's one of the problems that we're seeing heavily in high school right now is I see these boys because I have four sons. And my oldest son is 28. I have a 24, a 19, and then a 14-year-old boy. And what I've observed in high schools is these boys are sitting in classes that they don't necessarily want to be in, floundering. They're not given actual real responsibility, even though, like, right here, like deep in here, they know they are meant and capable and meant for more. And instead, they're sitting in a class checking the box so that they can someday graduate so they can flounder more until they figure out what they want to do in college, but they're not given real work and they want real work. And I think that it's caused all sorts of problems in the school system because of it, because it's wasting their time and they instinctively in their gut know it's wasting their time, And I think we would be far better off to return to the past where we go, okay, you're 12, you are capable of apprenticing somewhere. I mean, that's what I've done with my last two is they've apprenticed, they've interned. My 14-year-old works at a cabinet shop right now, twice a week, interning there. Um, he wants to get an actual a job to earn money. He's taken initiative. He knows what he wants to do. He wants to be a plumber and run his own business ultimately. And but he's just a little bit too young to get into plumbing apprenticeships. And so he said to me, Mom, I need to put together a resume because I want to work at this shop close to our house, and I know that they will hire a 14-year-old, versus his counterparts that they're like, well, I play video games. And not that my son doesn't like video games, because he does play them sometimes, right? He likes them. He enjoys them. But he has more of a sense of purpose than his counterparts who are just floundering. And I look at my now 19-year-old son, and when he was 14, he said, I want to get a job. So he got his suit on, and he's one of my children that's like absolutely a self-starter. Not all of my kids are, but he is one that he's probably my biggest self-starter. So he gets a suit on and he goes and he takes a resume around, which is where his brother got the idea, and gets hired at for a local pizza place and works there for several years. And he said, it's interesting, Mom. And he was about, I don't know, 15 or 16 when we had this conversation. He said, it's interesting. I talk to my public school friends, and they are so caught up in the drama of what's going on in school and of football and of this and that and the other. And he's like, and here I am working with adults who treat me like an adult, and they have real world things. They have, like fertility stuff and trying to support a family. And because most of the people that worked at the pizza place had to be over the age of 18. My son did dishes, like that was his job, but they had to be over 18. Alcohol was served at that restaurant. And so he's working with adults, and this person's excited because they're getting married, and this person, is sharing about this part of their lives. And he said, I am hearing real things, real life adult things. And suddenly I look at what's being talked about, and he goes, and I told my friends, what you're experiencing is not, it's not real, nor is it important. Like all of this drama that you're talking about, because some of those friends were girls as well. They like to bring in extra drama. And he said it's just different when you're around real and when you're around adults trying to be adults. And I guess thank you for not making me go to high school. So, but and still people will tell me, they're like, how do you get your kids to behave so maturely? And I'm like, I did something different. That's how. And not
Yeah.
that my kids don't have problems, because they absolutely have their own issues and their own things that they deal with. And sometimes my daughter had a meltdown yesterday about something, and I'm like, seriously, are you serious right now? Um, but when we allow them to move into adulthood at 12 and 13 and 14, when they historically and developmentally are ready to move into adulthood and take on more responsibilities, they they own it. Like you said, like when they get to solve the problems, when they get to make the choices, they do really great. But if we wait until they're 20 something or
Oh,
18 or 19, and they have
oh yeah.
no, that they've only been told what to do this whole time, and then we expect them to choose a livelihood for the rest of their life and spend thousands of dollars on it. No, we are doing them a disservice. They need to be given real responsibility at a younger age. Anyway, that's my soapbox lately. That's been my soapbox.
It's a great soapbox because I think there are a lot of people who have an intuitive sense of this, but they cannot articulate what they see because they have been so programmed or conditioned to see the system as default. And the default system says, well, you go to school till you're 18 and you go to college, and at
Mhm.
22 you come out and you get a job. And what as a consultant, and almost I'm also a retired Presbyterian minister, so I've seen all of this in both the business world and in the spiritual church world. Is that what happens is that people find themselves in a career at the age of 22, 23, and then when they hit 40, they realize, I don't want to be doing this. Why
Mhm.
am I doing this? And I'm doing this because someone told me I should. And yeah, I can make money at this, but I don't want to do this. And
Yeah.
so I have watched over the last 30, 40 years the increase of people changing careers in their 40s. I was one of those, changing their careers in their 40s, and then they have something they're going to do into their 90s.
Mhm. Yep.
And that, I mean, that's the way I view things. So I think we're in a moment of transition that is not um, being led um, by structure. It is being led by problems that people are searching for a different answer,
Yeah.
and they're going to change. And the question, part of my question is, okay, my oldest is 40, and he doesn't have any children, but he would like to have children at some point. And if he does, he'll do great. He'll be a great father. He'll be a great father. Um, but what I see is that the generations, let's say the Gen X and my generation, the baby boomers,
Mhm.
have done a disservice to the younger generations because we have not seen the effect that the way we do things has had on these younger generations, the millennials and the Gen Zs, and now the Gen Alphas.
Mhm.
And what I see, and I'm curious what you see. I see in particular the Gen Zs saying, no, this is not what we're going to do. We're going to do something different. And we don't know what that difference is, but we're certainly not going to follow the pattern that you older people have established for us.
Yeah.
And I've come to describe this as we give them answers to questions that they're not asking. And we
Mm.
expect them to follow our answers because we think we created the perfect society. But we didn't. We created a society that um, makes it very difficult for people to succeed.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, and I would agree with you. I look at my oldest son he did a traditional route. He went to college, he became actually he's still in school, finishing up his RN, and he works as a helivac EMT right now. So he did the traditional route, right? My 24-year-old son said, I'm not going to college. I look around and I see my friends he goes, when he was 18, he said, I don't know what I want to do. And I don't want to spend the money because my husband has said, well, we'll pay for part of university, but you got to have some skin in the game. So you're going to have to pay for part of it. And he said, no, I don't want to do that. I will work. He didn't think he loved academics. So now he's working on his own thing. He does work for my husband, doing some stuff part time, and he's learning and he's doing all of these different things. He loves online marketing, but he's like, I'm not wasting the money on a university. I will not. Not when it doesn't take a degree to do the things that I most want to do. My 19-year-old son right now is doing mission service work, and he and I were chatting on Monday, and he said, I think when I finish up here, what I want to do is I want to start my own business, but then I want to take certain classes, and I want to work doing some personal development stuff, and I really want to get into that field. I really love that field. But I need to have a little bit more life experience. But I might take some college classes here and there. And he goes, maybe if I feel a need and I need a degree where I end up, maybe I'll go back. But I know what I want to do. I've spent my teenage years doing various internships and working different jobs. I mean, and he did. He worked door-to-door sales. He also worked for a carpenter, and worked for a YouTuber and interned there, and got a feel of like, I like this, I don't like this, you know. Um, and I think you're absolutely right that they are saying I'm Generation X. I turn 50 next year. And I even look at my own kids, right? And how this one went to college, this one's like, and the rest of them are like, no, I'm going to do what I want to do. I have one, my 14-year-old, who's like, I think I want to go into the trades. I think that's what I want to do. I love working with my hands. I think plumbing is interesting. Um, and so I think you're absolutely right.
Well, that
I
excites me. That excites me that your son at 14 can see that because he now can um, actually go learn the trade and he can have his own business by the time he's 20.
Absolutely. Well, so this is what made me so livid this year, though. So I worked really hard trying to find. He's working at the cabinet shop, and people say, "Well, how did you do that?" I'm like, I called around and asked people, and I was like, "Would you take a child to apprentice with you?" And finally, I found Dale, who's been wonderful, and said, "Yeah, I will. I'll take him on." And he met with Jacob when he was 12 and said, "Listen, if you're going to work for me, I'm not going to pay you until you're worth your pay."
Oh, I
But and
love that.
legally when he could pay him. And he's like, but if you swear, which that this child does not, well, my kids don't swear in general, but um if you swear, or if you are lazy, or if da 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 da, I will fire you. I will treat you as an adult, but I expect you to work and work hard. And my son's like, absolutely, sir. Yes, yes, sir. I will do that. And he's done a great job. Um, and he still works there. But I worked really hard to find, okay, I know he wants to go and be a plumber. I found an enrichment program that was state funded for him to do. I'm in the state of Colorado, and the state allows for homeschoolers to go to a once a week program, and the state pays for it. And I say they pay for it, but I pay taxes. So really, I'm paying for it because I pay taxes, and just as many as public school families do. And so I found a construction program where they'd be able to certify the children earlier on, get them placed in apprenticeships earlier at 14, 15, and 16 in the trades of their choice and start taking all the necessary classes. He's already OSHA certified. This last year, he certified
Wow.
with OSHA. Like he did all, and then they'd be able to work in the trades and it was awesome. Like we were super excited about it. He loved it. He went last year. He learned construction. They were building a shed. They were learning all about the construction field and what that looks like from beginning to end. Loved it. And then the government stepped in and said, and the legislators were pretty blatant, as the construction people had told me. They said, listen, we're going to force homeschoolers back into the public school system no matter how we have to. And so they shut off all funding for enrichment programs that did not meet very, very strict criteria, which shut down his construction program. It shut down farm programs. It shut down equestrian programs. It shut down agricultural programs. And I look at that and it made my blood boil. And I did have to chuckle at the same time and say, do they not understand homeschooling families? As a homeschooling mom, I'll say, okay, you're going to take that away from me. Watch what I will do without the public funding. I will find another way, but I'm not going back in the system. And so they ended up having to shut down the program because it would have been too expensive for self-pay for most families. And so now we're trying to find another alternative for him, so that he can grow an apprentice quicker than waiting till he's 18 because he already knows. And I've even brought up, are you sure you want to work with poop? He's like, Mom, plumbing is more than just working with poop. And I don't mind the poop, but there is more to it. I'm like, okay, sounds good. But anyway, that's my big beef right now is like government intervention has hurt these programs.
Having had a failed plumbing system this year, I understand the value so yes, I think I think that the sort of thing, the politics of what you describe, is unsustainable. And I think the people who have been politically entrenched for a long time are trying to hold on to a world
Hmm.
that no longer exists. And we're watching a monumental change take place
Yep.
that the people who are in power and the people who have kind of control the media and all of that have do not understand the significance of the changes that are going on, and it's not about who's the president.
Mm-mm.
It goes happens at the local level. Then that's where the changes are happening, and there will be ways of families like yours to figure out how to make things work, and and well, how that I don't know how that happens, but that's what I see taking place. I see a monumental shifting from the hierarchical structure of society to something which is much more flatter and much more locally based. And
Yep.
so you're going to find local solutions to local problems,
Yes.
and because it's the only thing that's going to work. So my question here you say we're talking about school and we're talking about kids, but at a deeper level, what we're really talking about are parents
Yes.
and how parents understand what does it mean to be a parent. And my world, I'm looking at a very broad world, and I'm looking at the people who are in trauma. I'm looking at people like I look at the people who find that at age, like young women who find at the age of 13, their has just kind of exploded and they fall apart and they're on their own and they're out on the streets and they're selling their bodies because that's the only way they can make money. And there's a lot of that going on, and no one is really cognizant of that. But if you're aware of that kind of stuff, then you realize that we're in a stage where what we have to do is figure out how to make a parenting something better than it has been, and the structure of families work for kids in ways that it has not been working for a long time.
Hmm.
And
I
so
agree.
the question is, what does that look like? I mean, let me ask you this. So when you've raised these five kids, six kids?
Six kids. My youngest is 10. It's
Okay.
a little girl who's 10. Yeah.
So
So
they're
we're still.
they're learning a pattern of parenting from you and your husband.
Yeah. Not always good, might I add.
Well, but
So,
that's part of the learning. That's part of the
right,
learning.
right.
Okay. I mean, my kid's mother and I are not together, and we haven't been together for 13, 14 years.
Hmm.
But so the question is, how do we support parents? Let me put it this way. How do we support parents in helping them have a vision for being a parent that has a sense of optimism for what I can do for my child? Because I think that's part of what I see is that the parents feel overwhelmed by the challenges of being a parent,
Yeah.
but what they also need to have a sense of I'm doing something that has infinite value, and I want to be the best at this as I can be. So, what do you say to parents in that way? That's not a very clear question, but I think you understand what I'm trying to get at.
So I actually have a great deal of hope for especially these young parents that I'm seeing. I don't love the gentle parent movement. And I know people are like, oh no, anyway. But I'm seeing a shift. I'm seeing more of a shift away from that. When I started my podcast, I was anticipating that my audience were really women in their, 30s to 40s. And what has shocked me as I get emails and messages on social media and read comments on YouTube is that um, there is this vast group of young parents, dads in particular, that are these young dads that recognize something is wrong and they want better and reach out and they're starting to look to their elders for advice, for structure there. I'm also seeing this move. I mean, we're seeing it just as a society, this move to the shift to homeschooling, the shift to we've got to do education different. Maybe we set up micro school or whatever. But I'm seeing it with these younger parents that are like, I want better. I'm hearing it from them. I'm getting the emails. And I look at this and I go, okay, there is hope yet because all of these people are like, no, I want something better for my kids. Um, and and as parents, and I say this because my husband's parents are baby boomers. My parents were the silent generation. My parents passed away this past year. Um, and I see what a lot of these kids need is from the baby boomers and from us, the Generation Xers, is they need us to be present with them. They want to hear from us. There is this move of people like cutting off their families, right? I've seen that happen, but I've also seen a move and a shift of people going, what do we do and how do we do it? And I've seen more baby boomers and Gen Xers often be like, figure it out yourself. I'm checked out. I'm going to do my own thing. And I think that's wrong. We are meant to help bring up the next generation where they need our help. They need our love and they need our support and they need our encouragement. They don't need our criticisms. Um, they're doing the best that they can and they need us to still be parents, you know?
Yeah.
And they need us to still be parents
Yeah.
and not check out and be like, "Well, I raised you. I'm going to go retire now in a 50 plus community."
Uh,
And I
it
say
horrifies
that
me.
because well, I say it, but I watch it even with my in-laws who are great people, but they've told us they're like, well, we love the grandkids, but literally, my father-in-law said, we love the grandkids. However, It's time for us to live our own lives. We raised our kids and we want to have fun. And that's a direct quote. That's a direct quote from 3 weeks ago. That was a lovely conversation.
At church on Sunday, I was talking to a young man. His father and I went to seminary together, so I have some connection that goes beyond the young man and I having rapport. And
Mhm.
his wife is 6 weeks away from having their third child. And I said to him, I said, um, going from two to three is a big change.
Yeah.
And you don't know what that means yet, do you? He says, no. I said, listen, you can call on me day or night
I
whenever
love
you
that.
need me. And if it's to come over and watch the other two boys, watch your two boys, I will do that. But just know that you have backup.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of these young families that I have come in touch with. That's what they need. And it's interesting. I'm involved in a couple of churches. One is my traditional Presbyterian church, but I'm
Mhm.
also involved in a young Anglican church. It's just a
Okay.
startup, and the two pastors are both deacons. They're not even ordained ministers yet.
Oh.
And this church was was founded by five families from Pennsylvania who
Mhm.
decided together to move to North Carolina and start this church.
Yeah.
And I'm watching these families, and I'm thinking, wow, this is so um, alternative culture ish, and these families are so well connected, and these kids are so well. I don't want to say behave because they're not. It's not about behavior, but they seem to have a clear sense of being a child, but also what it means to be in relationship to an adult. And
Mhm.
it's just kind of an amazing thing to watch. And I tell the parents. I said, listen, I'm here because of you, and I want you to know that I'm here to help you, whatever that means. And just know that I'm supporting what you're doing because I think that it's very important. And they're going to find other families showing up at their church because the family is something which that family unit is the culture of this church.
Yeah.
And there are single people like me that show up, but we're showing up because there is a family environment there
Mhm.
which we want to be a part of, and we want to support these young parents and these kids, and I think that that's one of the things that some of us who are baby boomers actually are doing and want to do because we do care for these families.
Yeah. I believe that. Well, and I don't mean to disparage all baby boomers because it's not all baby boomers and it's not all Gen Xers either, right? I think that
Right.
there's still a healthy dose of people who are like, no, I still want to help. I still want to be a part. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. One of the things that I've noticed is more like because of the economy, because things are expensive, more and more young adults are moving back home, which I used to think, my husband and I used to say, well, when they hit 18, they're out of here. And I have since shifted my perspective and thought, no, no, no. Historically, family economies, you didn't leave the house until you got married, and then you'd been working with your family the whole time. And a lot of times you took on your family's trade or your family's, business, and you were set up financially, and you did just, you didn't start in debt with no knowledge. And I'm wondering if we are it's shifting back to that, or is there any hope to shift back to that family economy model? I don't know. What do you think?
I think that there's nothing that inhibits anything from happening because I
How do you
don't.
mean?
And what I mean is that we think that these trends are inevitable and they're just going to continue on into the future. I don't believe that's the case. I think people
Hmm.
respond to the situations they're in and they're making decisions. And so for these families in this small little church, this little Anglican church, what has happened is that um, one set of one set of the grandparents have moved to be close to these families.
Mhm.
They're leaving Pennsylvania and New York and coming here to be close to their grandchildren and to be supportive of the family itself. So I think that there's going to be an increasing sense that these family units need to be together.
Mhm.
And I think that let me back up and say this. What I see is that I see a lot of people who are in their 30s, 20s and 30s and 40s saying, I don't want to have children. I don't want to
Mhm.
be married. You know, they like that freedom, they like that independence. And so they're not going to be having children. But then I'm seeing these other families, they're not just having one or two children, they're having five and six children,
Mhm.
like you. And
Yeah.
that they're going to have an effect upon society because by the sheer mass of the size of these families are going to have an effect. And and the question is, what is that effect going to be? And I think it's going to be a growing kind of conservatism where the family um, uh, becomes sort of um, a way of understanding the way society works. The
Mhm.
family unit becomes a more dominant effect upon society because their numbers are such. And the individual person who's simply going to do what they want to do, they're going to find themselves, and I find this true for me as a divorced person in my 70s. I'm finding that people who are my age, who are single, who've gone through divorce or widowed in my age, they're not looking to create new families.
Mhm.
They're looking to establish their life as a single person, and they're going to do events, you know, at the local. They're going to play mahjong, and they're going to go play pickleball, and they're going to do all these things that please them, like you were describing. What your what the that your I guess it was your in-laws were saying that what this is that was then, this is now,
Mhm.
and I think that those individualized preferences for how I want to live my life are not going to have the kind of effect long term because uh, there is no real strength to that. There's just the individual doing what the individual wants to do. But when you have a family, particularly a family that you have five or six kids, you're going to be making decisions that are going to have an effect upon schools. You're going to have an effect
Mhm.
upon medical practices. You're going to have effect upon um, grocery stores, and the effect is going to be uh, a kind of a shift back to something that's older. I'm
Mhm.
convinced that that's going to happen because what is not going to be sustainable is the kind of stuff that's been going on where people are treated as individuals and they're kind of controlled, socially controlled by whatever the system is. It's like what you described going on in Colorado, where they said, "Well, we're not going to pay for these programs anymore because they're too costly, and we would rather them be back in the school systems," which may or may not be working very
Yeah.
well. Is it, so? How do I come to a clear statement of what you're asking? I think that. Well, let me step back. I have a leadership model called the Circle of Impact, and I
Mhm.
came to this conclusion at the turn of the century, back in around 2000. And it came after about 5 years of being a consultant. And what I saw were three patterns of behaviors across the spectrum of organizations. And you can add the spectrum into that spectrum,
Mhm.
families. Those are
Okay.
organizational structures. And what I found was there were three problems. There was a lack of clarity about thought, and about the lack of clarity of thought really is a lack of understanding what our values are, what our purpose is. You know, how do we define what a healthy family is? Those are all ideas. It's an idea dimension. The second one is there was a lack of respect and trust within the organizational structures I was seeing because everything was treated as a transactional thing. And so we were not building relationships. We were using relationships to advance our own individual purposes. And the people who were the most powerful and the most oriented towards extraction of resources from other people, they were the ones who were succeeding. But they only succeed for a period of time. Then the third thing was the structure of organizations was the great inhibitor to actually having clear thoughts and better relationships. And they were defining how we are to function. And I think this is, exactly what I saw happening with the public school system was that they were defining the way children should be treated, children should be understood, and that children should stay in their lane until they're 20 or 18, and then they're free to go do whatever they want to do. But by then they have been poorly nourished or nurtured so that they don't know what they're supposed to be doing, and it's going to take another 20 years when they hit 40 to say, oh, that's not what I want to be doing. I'm going to go do something else. So I think that all that is going to go away because it just is not sustainable. And the systems that have controlled this are not sustainable. And what is sustainable is community.
Hmm.
And I think what I see in community is something that's relational, and it's something that happens between people
Hmm.
who have a commitment to one another. They decide that we want to be in relationship with these families or with these people, and we're going to figure out how to make this work for the betterment of our community. And those people will find people rising up from in their midst who will run for city council or for county commission or for the public school system, and we will see. I think we're going to see over the next 15 years a dramatic change in what we have seen over the last 30 or 40 years. So,
With
and
that.
I think that the one of the things that's going to be the most significant will be seeing these families, large families, who have helped their children have a clear sense of their personhood and their value to the world, and they're going to help them decide this is who I want to be and this is what I'm going to go do. And they're going to support them not just up through school, but they're going to support them their whole life. And so these family units are going to be dynamic for generations. And I think because what I sorry for this monologue, but
No, I love it. I love it. Keep talking.
what I see is that the culture that we live in has been denying that generational history matters, and that
Right.
what happened 2 generations ago or 3 generations ago does not matter because the only thing that matters is what's happening right now. And that's not true at all.
No.
My
Mm-mm.
grandmother, my mother's mother, when I was 12, and I'm one of 15 grandchildren in that family, took me aside at the age of 12 and she told me, you may do anything you want, but do not bring shame to the family name.
Mm. Wow. Yeah.
And I have lived according to that ever since. That means I have changed a lot. I have been doing whatever I wanted to do, but I've been very careful not to bring shame to my family and to honor my family by not bringing shame to them.
Mhm.
That to me is a way of looking at what I see happening in a lot of these young families where they're having lots of kids and the kids are um, are doing well. I mean, from what
Yeah.
I see how they're relating to one another, and I mean, in some cases, the grandparents have taken over the parenting of the children,
Hmm.
but the children are
I
doing well. And
Yeah.
so I'm saying that I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful about what's going to happen in the future. And
I
I think
agree.
we're going to find it not hopeful at the level of social media and Washington and state houses of
Right.
states. We're going to see it at the local level of what's happening in neighborhoods and in public schools and in churches and in synagogues and maybe even in mosques and places where you have families that gather and their concern is not simply for some ideological concern, but their concern is for their children and the world that their children will inhabit in the future.
I agree. And I have a like my dream, right? I recognize not everybody can homeschool, and not everybody's equipped to homeschool. There's a couple of families that I know. I'm like, no, it would be too taxing on their family, and they're not in a position where that's a feasible option. My dream, my dream would be that communities come together and create little micro schools and where we see an emergence locally of one room schoolhouses and the parents who have the ability to step in and say, I can help teach your children because you're not in a position to teach your
Mhm.
child for whatever reason. Maybe they're expecting or they're sick or financially both of them have to or whatever, right? Whatever the circumstance that we come together as communities and we build one room schoolhouses or we just take the existing structures of public schools and we turn them into one room schoolhouses where there's multiple like
Well, ages, multiple ages all together in one room.
right, they're all
Yeah.
together, but there might be, like, okay, well, this neighborhood's, classroom is over here and this neighborhood's classroom is over here, but it's not by grade level, it's by it's whatever community wants to come together or even, they learn reading, writing, arithmetic, but then there's other classes where it's, if you want to learn woodworking, there's the resources available. I don't know how that would work. I don't know economically how that would work, but that would be my dream is that we would go back to the way it was prior to compulsory education, where there were everything with education was localized, everything. Um, and that's why they'd go from one community to the next, and education would look totally different. And yet somehow the masses got educated pretty stinking well. I mean, we've digressed as far as literacy and numeracy goes
Well,
now.
let me tell you
So,
of an experience that I had in 2017. I was in Vienna, Austria at a conference, leadership conference, and it was the last day, and we were in me and this guy from England, we're having lunch. We're standing at a high top table, and these three high school girls walked up to us, and so kind of think, what are you doing here? This is business. This is a corporate kind of thing, and they said, well, we go to a business high school here in
hmm.
Vienna. I said, really? And they began to tell me what they're learning. I said, listen, I'm going to be here all next week. I'll be glad to come over to your school and talk about leadership if you want. And
Mhm.
one of the girls got on the phone and called her one of her teachers who's somewhere else in the building. Says, "There's this guy from America who wants to talk about leadership. Can we have him come over to the school?" She says, "I don't know. Let me call the headmaster." She calls the headmaster. The headmaster says, "Well, I don't know. What do you think?" And so within a matter of about 10 minutes, we trans transitioned through the entire spectrum of the permission giving, and that was a Friday afternoon. Monday morning at 8:45, I arrived at the school and I
Oh,
spent
that's cool.
15 minutes with the faculty. Then I went to a digital business class, and the students were presenting their business models online for the things that they were selling. And I'm thinking, oh my, this is revolutionary. And then I got to speak to them, to the entire school for an hour after that. And I'm thinking, why aren't we doing this?
Hmm.
And I know that there are places where they're doing this, but then as I thought about this, I said, what if we decided that every child should learn the skills of entrepreneurship at the youngest age possible? So if they're learning how to read and learning how to do math and they're learning how to write, they're going to do it because they have a purpose that they have identified that they would like to apply that to. I want to be a vet, or I want to be someone who takes care of plants. Every child has some sense of something they want to do. And if we put them into the context of purpose oriented, then they learn all those skills because there's something for them that comes out of that. And then
Right.
by the time they're in middle school, they're actually creating their own businesses. That's the way I imagine applying what I saw in Vienna to what can happen in a school here in the U.S.
Yeah, which ideally would be amazing. Unfortunately, what ends up happening is it goes, well, there's got to be red tape. Well, the speaker that we're having in is not a certified teacher, and they need to be certified, even though they're an expert in the field. And unfortunately, that won't work. And if all kids can't do it, then we're not going to do it at all. And so there ends up being so much red tape that nothing
until
happens until
until
somebody until
until some school system says, well, we're going to do this because this is a great idea,
yeah.
and this will be financially beneficial to our community because we're going to see new businesses starting in our community that are, so and
It would have to be outside of the system though. That's the
yeah,
pro that what well
but it's
that's what I'm saying
happening.
actually. It's true. It's happening. Well, and I even look at one of the enrichment programs here in Colorado Springs that it's actually tied to a school district, so it did not get shut down by the state because of funding. I was talking to the principal of that program, and she said, "This is my dream. My dream is to use funding and buy a food truck and have the kids learn culinary skills and entrepreneur skills and then be able to sell at the food truck and learn it all." And she goes, "But this is what I'm up against is I am up against all the red tape with the state."
Yeah,
I'm like, "It's true. But if it was private, right? If it was a not publicly funded, she could do it now.
yes.
It would just take, well, we've got to raise the capital to do it and she could make it happen. And I do see like there are alternative type schools popping up. There's the Alpha School run by Mackenzie Price, started in Austin, Texas. They do 2 hour online AI learning, and then they spend the rest of the day working on projects that they really want to work on, entrepreneur projects. A lot of the kids are already making money. The downside is the tuition is like $40,000 a student a year. And so we'd have to figure out how do we introduce these alternative models outside of the system because the red tape is ridiculous. So we'd have to do it outside of the system and make it affordable for families to be able to put their kids in, which is where the community comes in.
And my hope, this is where my optimism comes, is that these kids who are millennials and Gen Zs and Gen Alphas see this already, and they're going to be the ones who are running the governments in the future. So
Yeah.
I think we have to be patient and allow for the development of these processes to unfold. And I'm convinced that it's going to happen. I interviewed two 17-year-old girls this year,
Mhm.
and one of them started her own business. She has a food tour business in her town, and she does the food tours for her town and another town about half an hour away. And she and her parents had been on some trip and they'd done a food tour. She says, "I think I'd like to do that in our town." And so they helped her start her business. This other 17-year-old girl has already written her first fantasy novel, and she started on her second one.
That's awesome.
So I think that where we allow for young people to take initiative, they will find a way to make it work. And I think
Mhm.
if people like you and me care about them and support them in doing that, they will find a way to get through the morass of red tape
Yeah.
and doubt that the public, and particularly my generation, has for them. Um, I think we're going to see something pretty special happen. And I think what you're doing is really, really important.
Thank you.
And because you're speaking very positively about children, about parenting, about schools, but you're also being very clear about what is important. And I just say that because the whole reason to have you on here was I want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing because I think it's really important. You have a voice which really matters in this world
Thank you.
of child development and parent development and family development and communities. And you may feel like it's sometimes your lone voice, but you're not. You're not.
Thank you. Thank you,
So,
Ed. I appreciate it. And thank you for the work that you're doing in connecting people and getting positivity and real change out there. Thank you. Thank you.
well, it's what I have to do. It's
Mhm.
I don't have any choice. It's like I see that this is where we're going to go. And to me, um, when we went through the first couple of years of COVID, I was not certain that people would be able to respond well to what was happening to them.
Mhm.
But then I began to see conversation groups popping up, and I began to see people talking about things that I'd never heard before. So I think we're seeing the beginning of a really a renaissance or a transformational period in time, and you're part of that, and your family's a part of that, and seeing where your children will be 20, 30 years from now is one of the joys that you're going to have, watching how they have taken all this that you have given to them, you and your husband have given to them, and seeing how they manifest that in ways that have a significant impact upon lots and lots of people.
Thank you. Well, I'm very hopeful for the future, even with all of the ugly that's out there in the world. I interact with so many wonderful mothers and fathers of all different generations, lots of grandparents raising their grandkids, and I've gained a lot of I gained hope, and then even talking with teenagers, there's so many, for as much of a bad rap as they get, and there's some that are out of control. I feel like most teenagers, like there is so much goodness and so much excitement for the future and a rumbling inside of counter revolution, I would say, of like we
Yeah.
need to return to the past. We need to like we in order for our future to be better, we need to return to when things were better. Not that things were perfect, but take the good from the past and implement it so that we can have a more positive future. And I see that with these kids, which is really exciting.
Well, the world that brought about Prussian educational theory is no longer here.
Right,
And it's time for a different educational theory to emerge. And I believe it will because um, the theories have to work. And if
right,
they don't work, the only way they go away is by trying something new. And
it's
I
true.
believe that there's an openness growing because people don't like what they see happening, and
Right,
so they say, well, what can we do differently? And I think we just join them and say, okay, how about this idea?
sure. Yeah.
So
Well, okay, so and I'm not sure how you are with time, but can I share
we
something
can
that I
we can go as long as you want.
okay. I
Because
okay,
I'm gonna
so
I'm gonna show this whole thing because I think this is that important.
well, thank you. So I a friend of mine told me about a book a few months ago, and the book came out last August, and it's called The Preparation, and it's written by Doug Casey, Matt Smith, and Maxim Smith. Matt Smith is the father, Maxim Smith is the son, and Doug Casey is a friend of theirs. And and I had Matt Smith on my podcast, and then I just interviewed Maxim, but that hasn't released just yet. Maxim is the son. Maxim is 20. And the premise of the preparation is that we've wasted so much money and time going to universities that are not, where kids are coming out of college with debt. They're coming out of college without becoming anything. And there is no in the Western culture, there's we've lost the idea and this rite of passage, particularly for boys. So they created this book, and when Maxim was 17, he and his dad had Doug Casey actually had the idea, and he presented it and said, "What if we bring back this idea of a Renaissance man? That rather than focusing on what I want to have in the future, we focus on becoming, being an amazing person, doing phenomenal things, and then ultimately we'll have what we want in the future by doing those two things. So they wrote this book, and instead of going to college, they call them cycles. Every 3 months, the young person has to do a cycle. So, for example, the first cycle was get your EMT certification, and you work while you're doing it so you can pay for it, and you live with friends or family so that you can help pay for each cycle. Another cycle was getting your pilot's license. Another cycle was learning to sail. Another cycle was learning Muay Thai fighting in Taiwan. Another cycle was learning the construction process from beginning end to end. Another cycle was going to Italy and studying under at this foreign cooking school and learning culinary skills and chef skills. So the idea, and in the meantime, they're in the library studying, they're watching online free classes through like Harvard and Yale, and there are all these free online classes. Hillsdale College offers free online classes that people can take. They take these free online classes, so they're building their minds. They're reading phenomenal literature. They're reading Socrates. They're reading Pluto. They're reading, phenomenal literature, listening to incredible music. And so they're building their mind and they're creating a Renaissance man. So Maxim started the preparation when he was 17. He did his EMT license. He went on, got his pilot's license. He did a couple work cycles to be able to save up, and he's done various cycles. He said that the thing that shifted for him was when he did his sailing license, because it was so hard and so grueling that he emerged and he felt like he became a man. Like that was the cycle where he became a man. So they're having all of these rich experiences. In the meantime, every week they have to write about their experience on Substack. And so I was fascinated by this idea, and so I had Matt Smith on the podcast, and he was sharing it with me. Well, my nephew did some mission service work, got home, and he's like, I don't really want to go to college, but I don't know what I want to do next. Maybe I'll become an electrician. I don't know. And I said, listen, here's an idea for you. What if you did the preparation? And so he's like, okay, so now that was back in April. Now he's in Alaska working for a construction company. He's planning on getting his heavy operator certification. He'll be in the fall. He's already signed up for EMT courses. And he told me, he said, Auntie, I feel so alive and I feel so much hope. And he's like, and I'm changing as a person in the most positive way. And he's like, and when I spend time in my studies, like I just like all of the things that I'm learning, whether it's the actual hands-on experience or it's the online classes or it's the books that I'm reading, he's like, I feel like it's changing who I am, that I am becoming the kind of man that I want to be. And they make them, they're like, you have to decide what values you want to engulf and become anyway. And it's blown my mind, and now like, everybody needs to know about this, that there's alternatives and we can actually start it younger with our kids. The idea of apprenticeships earlier on when they're 12 and 13 and 14. And then by the time that they hit 17 and 18, they really go, full court press with, now I'm getting my EMT. I'm doing this. So Maxim gets his EMT. He gets his pilot's license. He does a few more cycles. He's offered a job because of his certifications and his licenses. He's offered a job fighting wildfires privately for $650 a day, seasonally. He's been invited back, so that paid for his next cycle coming up, And so when I interviewed Maxim last week, he said the same thing that my nephew said. He said, he goes, I feel confidence, whereas I felt like I was floundering before. I feel like I've gained confidence, but I also have more understanding of who I am and where I want to go, even though I haven't figured out exactly what the future is going to look like yet. He's not afraid of the future. And so I think about that with these young adults that are floundering and they're like, do I go to college? Do I not go to college? Well, what if there's an alternative? Um, what if you did something different and took control of the reins of your own life and went, no, I'm going to get this certification and that certification, and I'm going to experience and see the world and enjoy the life that God has given me and develop these talents and create new talents, So I've been absolutely fascinated by this the
Um,
last few months. So anyway,
I I'm speechless because I wish that that had been available to me
yeah.
because I was not well suited to academic work
Mhm.
because I questioned everything, every sentence, every paragraph. I was question, and so if you got a 300-page history book you're reading, how are you going to get through it if you're questioning everything that you're coming across? And
Yeah.
and then somehow you have to figure out a way to survive academia so you can have the credentials to become whatever it is that you got to. And what you're saying is that the certification is a certification that I can do something.
Right.
I would uh, I want you to introduce me to them because I'd like to have them here.
I would be happy to.
Introduce me to whomever you want. Even if some of your children. I mean, I'm glad to. I want to talk to. I'm convinced that the Gen Z is going to be the change agent for what we're talking about. And um, I'm writing a novel where it's not set in our time, it's set in the 60s and 80s, but I'm writing about a young boy who at the age of 3, he's the sixth of 6 children, but he's the youngest by 6 years. And his parents are killed in a plane crash when he's 3. And he goes through his childhood living with his grandparents on a farm. And he comes out of that not knowing who he is and not knowing what he
Mm.
wants and really not knowing who his parents are. And he's driven to and he goes off. I mean, I'm giving away some of the story. So he's gonna go through his first semester of college and realize this is not for me.
Yeah.
And so he's gonna leave. And here it is, 1983, and he's leaving to go find out what happened to my parents.
Mm.
Because there's been no talk about it, no talk in the family about it. They just died and they vanished into air and they just kind of vanished. And so what really happened? And so I see that as the state that most of these 20 and 30 somethings are experiencing, and also high school kids are experiencing. They don't know what the world is because the world that we presented to them doesn't work for them.
Mhm.
And so he so just tell you this. So I'm in Cody, Wyoming last fall, and I come into this restaurant. I'm sitting at the bar, and I'm there working on this novel, and at that point, I had gotten where he had left to go where the plane crash had happened, and he was interviewing people and that sort of thing. So he's learning how to talk to people. And so I'm sitting there, and there's this young man sitting next to me, and we start talking. I say, "So what do you do?" He said, "Well, I'm 25 and I have a construction business." I said, "Oh, that's great, And he said, "What does your father do?" Well, he has a couple of manufacturing businesses, and I'm building a house for my father. And I said, "That's great. So what do how do you understand all this?" I'm asking. He says, "Well, I've decided that once I finish my father's house, I'm going to quit my business, and I'm going to travel, just kind of figure out who I am and what I'm going to do." I said, "Really? Let me tell you the book I'm writing." And it's a mirror image of what I see the protagonist of my novel doing. And he looks at me, "Really?" And so what it would confirmed for me is that these young people are at a juncture where they should be released to go find out what they need to be doing with their lives, and
Mhm.
that they should not have to follow someone's prescription, my generation's prescription. I mean, the things that, I tell them, I said, well, what people my age are saying, well, they're just lazy people, they're just scrolling all the time. They don't know how to work hard. And I said, no, you
Mhm.
created a world where they're going to fail. You don't understand that the world that you created is set up for so young people will fail. And of course,
Mhm.
they don't respond. They don't, my generation doesn't accept that. But when I say that to these young people, they said, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, you give them something to work hard for, like a true reason for them to work hard. They will give you everything. They will give you everything. Because they want the respect. They want those things,
It's,
so
well, we all want those things too,
right,
but
right.
we've kind of hidden, we're kind of hiding behind a curtain because we don't really want to admit that we want all those things. And we allow our wealth and our credentials and our careers, and our pensions all to kind of be a way of having to deny actually we have to do. We continue to have to figure out who we are, even if
Right.
you're in your 70s or 80s. And so
Hmm.
this is a moment in time that uh, will be talked about for the next 200 years.
I
I'm
believe that.
I'm convinced of that. And to be a part of that, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be a part of that and to be able to stake part of the claim to being one of those who's trying to make it work.
Yeah.
And you are
Yeah.
too.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm still, I still pray. I'm like, please don't let me screw up my kids, and please, I try to
You're
be
not.
guided. Try to be guided by Jesus. I try, and I just hope that I'm guided by the Holy Spirit as I do these things. And it's terrifying at the same time, speaking out and saying things that people don't like to say. But I feel like there's a lot of things that need to be said. And there's also encouragement that needs to be given. That's I do have to say that's one thing I've noticed. Um, I've thought about in the homeschooling world. I hear a lot of the, not all of them, but a lot of the homeschooling influencers say, "Well, public school parents, da 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 da," and I look at so many of my friends who public school, and their hearts are so good, and they are doing the best that they can. And I don't ever want to put them down or make them feel
Oh,
less than because of what of the choices that they make to have their kids in public school, because I don't know what's going on in their hearts. I don't know what the Lord's talked to them about or guided them to do. But my hope is that we'll become more unified as a society, as neighbors, that we'll stop dividing, finding reasons to be divided, you know, um, and that will come together and at the same time say the hard things that need to be said, which is also
when
hard. So,
when I took over the scout troop, I told my sons, I said, listen, I don't know what I'm doing here. I need you to tell me, I need you to tell me what I need to see. So we're gonna debrief every Thursday night as we drive home because I need you to help me to do a good job. And that established a relationship of equality between me and my sons, which remains today. So they're my best friends, and
mhm.
they tell me what I need to hear because that's the relationship that we establish there. And I think if parents can find a way to establish that kind of rapport with their children, that they will find that their children have this magnificent capacity to be kind to their parents in ways that oftentimes they never see.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you, Janae, for the work that you're doing, for the courage to leave what you were doing to start something new, and the example that you are to other parents, but also to your children. And so I just celebrate that and know that that has not gone unnoticed.
Thank you.
To all of you who are watching this, I want you to think about not what your family should be doing or what your children should be doing, but what you should be doing in terms of how you care for the younger generations and how you build relationships with them, not to tell them what they should think and what they should do, but how you can build relationships with them where you listen to them and learn what they have to say, and then help them find ways to achieve the things that they desire. And if you can do that, then you're going to have an effect upon the world that you have never imagined you having, because you have been locked into systems that do not allow for your freedom. But that's what I see happening. And so if you want to be a free person who makes a difference that matters in the world, this is a place to start. Go find some young person in their 20s or 30s and say, how can I help you achieve the goals that you have in your life? And if you can do that, then let me know, because I want us to talk about this here, because I think this is one of the critical questions that we're all facing today. I thank you for watching. I thank you for your support. I know that this is all very important to many of you, and we'll keep talking about this. And we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye bye.